Physics Bites,
a science podcast in English
by the students of Notre-Dame d'Ascension.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Physics Bites, our English language physics podcast of the students of Notre-Dame d'Ascension High School here in Paris, France. We have a new group today who are going to continue the chapter on carbon emissions. We're nearing the end of the series, but this is one of the more important ones. We're talking about waste management, because waste management, as you will see, plays a big role in how the carbon emissions from humanity has gone up over the years, and it's going to be a bigger and bigger problem, if I'm not mistaken. I have a new co-host today.
I'm Luca.
Luca was with us in one of the previous episodes on carbon emissions from buildings. It was a very, very interesting topic. And now the students are going to present themselves.
So my name is Raphael.
Hi, my name is Colombe.
Hi, my name is Sebastian.
And we have Sebastian. So all three of you guys, no, that's not true. Two of you guys were students with me last year, and Raphael, you joined the team this year. All right, so let's get to the good stuff. So how about you give us an overview of what we mean by carbon emissions from waste? And then we can get into more details afterwards and get into some other solutions.
Last time we focused on different fields, and Raphael was
E-waste.
E-waste, Sebastian.
I talked about incinerators.
And I focused on food waste and plastic packaging waste.
You also have a fourth class member who is not here today because he is in the middle of writing an exam. But if I'm not mistaken, you guys are going to talk a little bit about his part of the presentation as well. Okay, so let's start with e-waste.
So I have presented e-waste. E-waste is about all the electronic waste you can buy in the market, such as like computers, phones, video games, things like that. And the big problem about e-waste is not really when you throw it. It's what it is inside of your what is inside of your device. Such as there is different types of like elements, such as like you can go at, like about copper.
Right.
Most of them are like toxic substance that could be like more polluting. Yes, could be more polluting.
Right. And they're not very easy necessarily to just dispose of. So, for example, if you have a used phone, what do we do usually? We sort of just either throw it out, or we don't really take it apart and take the good stuff out of it and then leave the bad stuff out of it. But what you're saying is that there's a lot of chemicals in there which are actually quite toxic and harmful. Yes. And so we're just sort of throwing it into nature without dealing with it in a neither sustainable way, neither a very like clean way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Such as like when you throw it out, you just throw it in the garbage, and people are just collecting them. They are gonna put it like in a big place. We can call them like rot. It's like a rot place, and they're just gonna rot. And the big problem is like it could like produce like toxic gases, which can be like really harmful to the atmosphere. But it's also toxic to humans, and we don't really like recycle them. Just to give some numbers, in 2019 we had like 32.6 million of e-waste that was like produced, and we only have like about this number 70.4% that have been like collected and recycled.
And they're not very easy necessarily to just dispose of. So, for example, if you have a used phone, what do we do usually? We sort of just either throw it out, or we don't really take it apart and take the good stuff out of it and then leave the bad stuff out of it. But what you're saying is that there's a lot of chemicals in there which are actually quite toxic and harmful. Yes. And so we're just sort of throwing it into nature without dealing with it in a neither sustainable way, neither a very like clean way.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, such as like when I've done my research about like the fluorocarbon, we're gonna get to gases, yes, and it's the most gases you can find in the computer. It is in the cooling system,
Right. And not just computers, but many electrical
many
and electronic devices use
yeah, because we need like to cool the CPU or like different parts of the computer. So you need to cool it down, and there is like yes, there is gases which are like fluorocarbon, and it's one of the biggest like carbon emission you can find in those.
Okay. You also talked about just when we throw a lot of our electronic devices into the trash, over time they sort of emit a lot of gas and produce a lot of pollution. Currently, what is the main way we are dealing with a lot of our electronic wastes? But it could be telephones, computers, anything that's old electronic devices. When we throw it out, where does it go?
So, as I said before, like some of them are like collected and recycled, such as you're gonna take the devices and just put it into pieces and just recycle it to make new phones or different devices. But there's also like it go to the trash in a big trash.
Okay.
And they're just gonna rot, such as I said, and it's just gonna pollute. There is no like afterlife.
We also know that a lot of this kind of waste goes into some third world countries, in Africa, in India as well, for example, where people sort of deal with them and live in that trash in a very, very sort of miserable and polluting circumstances, where they burn a lot of these elements to get the metals out. So, which brings up the question of recycling, because one of the main reasons our electronic waste produces a lot of trash is because you need to extract a lot of metals and a lot of resources to build these devices. And if we don't recycle them, we throw them out, we'll have to re-extract these metals and these resources. And that is an indirect way of producing a lot of pollution. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that?
So, as you just said, it's the component that is making pollution. So we have different solution to just like overcome this problem. Such as like I have like three different solutions, such as you don't need to like start when it's not working, you can just repair it yourself. Right. By looking at YouTube or just giving it to someone that know how to deal with the stuff. Yeah. So you can just do it like this. Or there's a different platform. Before you just buy the device you want, you can go on different places that just do the repair for you, and you just rebuy something that was already used, such as it's not like polluting, it's already created, so you're not.
We also know that a lot of this kind of waste goes into some third world countries, in Africa, in India as well, for example, where people sort of deal with them and live in that trash in a very, very sort of miserable and polluting circumstances, where they burn a lot of these elements to get the metals out. So, which brings up the question of recycling, because one of the main reasons our electronic waste produces a lot of trash is because you need to extract a lot of metals and a lot of resources to build these devices. And if we don't recycle them, we throw them out, we'll have to re-extract these metals and these resources. And that is an indirect way of producing a lot of pollution. Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yes. For instance, 1/3 of all the food produced end up in the garbage, which is a lot, and it represents like 1.3 billion tons of goods. Mm-hmm. And the thing is that the world population continue to grow, so we should make something with all this food, because growing more food will not help. And
we know that, as we heard with the group from agriculture, that agriculture and producing food for humanity is one of the main sources of carbon emissions. So you're saying basically, if we wasted less food, we would need to produce less food. And so, again, indirectly, we're helping reduce carbon emissions from human activity.
Yes. And it contributes a lot to global greenhouse emissions, So by reducing this, we could not stop, but it would reduce the impact of the climate crisis.
So you kind of talked about 4 different aspects of our food and plastic waste. Do you want to go into some details about that? Maybe everything from, the energy used for preparing food to like the packaging to decomposition in waste, etc.
Yes, it represents a lot of carbon emissions, but the thing also, for example, plastic packaging waste represent a lot of...
Right. So that was one of the main things that we don't think about when we talk about food, for example, is that most of the food, at least in developed countries that we use, whether it's buying it or eating it directly from a restaurant or whatever, is wrapped up in a lot of packaging, which uses a lot of plastics. And we know plastics are very difficult to deal with when it comes to waste management.
But it also protects food. So it's a complex topic because...
Right. It helps preserve it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it keeps it fresher for a longer...
Right. So we do need packaging because if we didn't use it, you're saying we would have to renew food more quickly because it would get sort of corrupted much more quickly. But at the same time, this packaging is a problem in and of itself. What about the methane that's issued from the decomposition of waste food?
But also, I just wanted to come back to the plastic thing. For example, we saw that some alternatives are developing, such as cardboard packaging.
Right.
But it can also alterate the food, for example, that plastic does not really do. So it's not for the moment, the research are not as good as in the plastic way.
Right. So you're saying that the problem with plastic is that it's really such a good and useful...
Yes, and it does not alterate the...
right. But at the same time, we hear a lot of information about microplastics being in everything and posing a lot of
if
problems.
we develop a new alternative, we should not deal with those kind of issues. So, but cardboard, for example, has the same issue.
And most of our food that's wasted goes into sort of wasted landfills, and landfills are a huge source of greenhouse emissions, whether it's carbon dioxide or methane, which is much, much worse than carbon dioxide in general. Okay. Speaking of landfills, maybe we can see what Sebastian has to say about this, because that's what you focused on in your research, right?
I focus on incinerators, but I also forgot about landfills. I talk a little less about them. But before we have the thing that we burn to incinerators, we usually call them municipal solid waste, but usually it's just garbage. You have plastic, cardboard, or other things. And the great advantage when you burn things is that you reduce drastically its volume and its mass, usually by 90%. So at least you don't have to put them in a dump. However, first problem comes with the ashes, that you can't really burn them again, and they are usually sent to a landfill, and they can also become toxic if you don't treat them.
Right.
But and we're talking a little bit about numbers. Since the proportion of carbon in municipal solid waste is around the same in CO2, burning 1 ton of municipal solid waste will give you 1 ton of emitted CO2. So it's easy to understand.
Right. So I think that's the main thing we think about when we talk about burning garbage. Is that, there is benefits to it. We don't have to fill up the land. It destroys a lot of maybe bacteria and a lot of health issues that might be there, but we're still burning stuff. And when we're burning stuff, we're emitting carbon, and that's what we're trying to reduce. Are there any solutions that could let us keep on incinerating without having so much carbon emissions?
It's a little bit difficult because when we burn something, you combust it, and the combustion products that you have is carbon. But one thing that people had an idea is getting energy from incinerators. If you can make them a little more useful.
Right.
But it emits less energy than carbon, but it still can be useful. However, well, yes, it has a problem of pollution, and it comes with another problem, is that building an incinerator in any place will tend to reduce the recycling rates of the...
All right. So you're saying because people know that the garbage is not going to be filling up a landfill, they'll still produce garbage, thinking that we'll burn it anyway. Okay, that's interesting.
In England, people have shown that 50% of things that we burn could have been recycled, and we can talk about cardboard or paper that are usually easily recyclable.
Right. So for you, if I understand correctly, the undertone of what you're saying, while incineration can be a good solution to the problem of landfills, it is not an ideal solution at all. And it's actually maybe just as problematic, but in different ways, whether it's behavioral or it is in terms of the carbon emissions. I do have in mind an example because we did a school trip, not with you guys, but one of the classes before you guys to Denmark, to Copenhagen, and we visited an incineration plant, which is very, very top of the line, and a big part of the whole incineration plant was the filtration system that they had built to sort of have it so that by the time the air from the burning goes out, it doesn't contain any carbon anymore. I remember the person who was our guide was telling us you could actually breathe the air that's coming out of the incinerator and it's just as clean as normal air. We didn't try it to make sure, but the problem with that is that it's a lot of advanced technology, and building a plant like this has its own carbon emissions and it has its own costs in different ways. Luca, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to intervene. I don't want to monopolize the talk.
I have a lot of questions, but I have one actually for the incinerators. So, is there any way to incinerate without pollution, maybe using bacteria or enzymes?
Okay, recently, yes, people have found enzymes or bacteria that could not only destroy plastic waste, but other kind of waste. They are usually, I have some names like esterases, lipases, or depolymerases. Well, it's a little bit hard with the table. They destroy the carbon backbone of the plastics.
Right. Just as a reminder, plastics come from oil products, right? They are a derivative of oil products, which means that they're very, very rich in carbon-carbon bonds and carbon-hydrogen bonds. And that is the reason why they're difficult to recycle, because they're really long chains of carbon, and hydrogen, carbon, oxygen. And while it might be difficult to industrially treat these kinds of chemicals, bodies of most living organisms have molecules which deal with this, because that's how we get our glucose and energy, is by taking maybe a lot of long chain carbons and sort of breaking it down, which is why this enzyme solution is a potentially viable one. Are there any such methods used commercially, or is it mostly just still research?
Still on the developing part of the solution, but the big advantage that it has, it's just like incineration, you reduce the volume drastically, and I guess it pollutes way less.
Right, because I was going to ask, do these enzymes, maybe one of the products that they might produce might be methane or something close to methane?
I haven't searched about that, but we have to maybe.
Okay.
But I think the problem now is to imagine some centers that will make this usage possible, and to industrially produce these enzymes, but I think this won't be hard for
In any case, I don't see anything like that being used on a big scale like we need to deal with waste management anytime soon, probably. Okay. While we were talking about landfills and incineration, what is the main problem with landfills? Why is it that we want to reduce our landfills, the volume and space they take?
Well, it's two reasons. The first reason is it's evidently because it takes very much space.
Right.
That's it's evident. But the other problem is the methane problem, which is usually more stronger than the carbon in terms of
something like Right. Something like 30 to 40 times more potent when it comes to the greenhouse effect.
And in the atmospheric conditions, usually it is the equivalent of 1.38 tons of CO2, which is still greatest. And for instance, in the United States, the landfills emit as much as 21.6 million passenger cars, which is a lot.
What solutions do you have for us, Sebastian? What can we do? You're making us very depressed with all this talk about greenhouse gases and bacteria and no solutions. What are some solutions that could help us in the future?
The evident solution is increasing the recycling rates, but we always think about recycling more, but at the end it's very difficult. It has to be on both individual and industrial scale.
Right.
So at the individual scale, what can we do is waste sorting, like don't waste plastic waste in a plastic trash and organic waste in the trash can. And then when these wastes are sent to recycling centers, the problem that comes is usually when with food waste and plastic waste, when they're together, the plastic packaging are dirty, and this makes the recycling process very difficult. But plastic, in fact, isn't that hard to recycle. It's usually 75%, I think.
Wow, that's a big portion.
But the problem is that we don't have very much washing centers with plastic recycling centers. So I think that we have to do is to incentivize the building of washing centers, to not just waste the dirty plastic that we can produce.
So we are talking about dirty plastics, and I have a question for you, Colombe. So we were talking about the plastic packaging, and can we force mass retailers to reduce or even eliminate plastic packaging without fearing for health conditions? And that made me think to another question. So how to make recycling a part of our society? That includes laws and
bigger scales, because
exactly.
and also laws and everything, because at our scale we cannot do we can act, but it's not as it will not have the same impact as a country or a government.
Right. The problem, as I think we have started to realize with most of this stuff during our series on carbon emissions, that we tend to put a bit too much emphasis on individuals acting, whereas the problem is much more a problem of our system and our societies, the way it's working, and much more dependent on the industrial scale of things than what actual individuals do.
We can do many things, but if the government doesn't follow us, it will not work.
Right. Or at least if the government or big corporations and the industrial side of things, they don't follow. But I guess in a way you can say that governments and industry and commercial entities, they go where people want them to go, right? So if people behave differently, then they will be forced to change themselves as well.
Yeah, so we have to change first, then the government will follow, you think?
That's the idea, right? Governments are for the people in a way. Yeah. At the same time, I think it's a bit naive maybe to think that they're going to just let us change our behavior knowing that it will have an impact on their results, I suppose. So it's a problem that goes, which one comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? So what do you think? Would you be in favor, for example, of passing much more strict laws? Where would you, if you had the power to make a difference or to have an impact on a larger scale, what would you suggest we should do to help with
the thing
this?
Is that we do not pollute as much as developing countries, for example.
Can you go into a bit of detail why that's the case?
In food sector, because we do not waste as much food as developing countries. Because, for example, we have plastic packaging, that protects it, and in developing countries, the food is not as fresh as ours for.
So in a way, you're saying also that our food industry is much more developed, so it's able to be much more efficient and much more clean. Whereas in developing countries,
but we use much more plastic.
Yeah.
It's complex.
Yeah, that's the idea I get from listening to you talk about this, that it's never just, okay, just use less plastics. No, I mean, if we're using this much plastic, it's because it has some miraculous properties that we need and we require, which has helped our society, but at the same time, it's sort of getting out of hand. Glass, can glass be used instead of plastic?
At not a long time ago, but like at our parents' teenagers
so
and
my
everything.
age,
Yes,
maybe?
Yes. There was this system, but with, for example, bottle of Coke and water,
milk,
Yeah.
stuff like this, you would recycle. You fill up your bottle, you come
Yeah.
back instead of always, yeah.
Yes, but now I don't know if it really really fits into our way of living life, because we are everywhere at the same time. Everything is traveling and everything,
Right.
and it's a bit more complex. But
How about you guys as individuals, as young individuals, young adults? Are you aware of how much you use plastics in most of your stuff that you have? Do you think about that, for example, when you go to the store?
for example, in our pencil case, they're just like only plastic. Everyone is the pencil, the
pens, the rulers?
everything.
What about the fact that, for example, most of the drinks that you might get are always coming in plastics? Most of the food you get, do you guys think about that, or is it sort of just it's the norm, right?
That's quite a lot. And once when I go to the garbage, for example, the plastic garbage is like full every day, which is a lot.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
The amount of food.
Everything
you're
is
right,
is wrapped in plastic. The fruits, everything.
Do you guys again practice like recycling at home? Do you try and put it into place? Do your parents follow? Are they resistant to it? Do you separate like organics, papers, glass, plastics? But
I feel that it doesn't means a lot between when I see all the plastic in an industrial scale, I don't feel like my recycling
like individual gesture
yeah.
is making much of a difference.
So that makes me think to another question: is it mainly a consumption issue or our mindset that we must change?
Right. So is it a question of the economic system, or is it a cultural question in a way?
Well, I think both are very linked because our mindset pushes us to always buy more and more, and also the big corporation take advantage of it and empower this feeling. So if we achieve to collectively buy less product, we could produce less waste and also push the industry to push less, to force them our behavior. But that looks like an utopic world, but we have to try still, I think.
Right.
And also, our world has changed a lot in not many years, like not a long time ago, but we did not use as much plastic as now.
Right. It's rather recent, like 2 or 3 decades that we've used this much plastic. Even our cars, there's more and more plastics in them compared to before, because it's such a useful material. It's light, it's durable, it's malleable, but at the same time it keeps its shape. It's easier to clean. It is a sort of...
and also, I think that now most people live in towns, and for example, our grandparents maybe used to go to the farm to the eggs, the milk.
But I think maybe in that generation, the reason it was like that was also because there was much less plastics available, right? Like it was. Right,
yes,
like
and we did not use plastic because everyone lived in a small town. Now.
Okay. I think you're right. The problem is a very complex one. The origins of it are very complex one. We can't just say, oh, this is good, this is bad, this is what you do, this is what you stop. I think you have to do an analysis of seeing what are the benefits, what are the risks, and in the long term, what it would be, Raphael.
And I guess, like, in addition to this, I don't know if you know about now, but we also starting like throwing out plastic in the ocean.
Right.
And like there's like I think it's the 8th continent.
Right, this is the famous myth that if we had all our garbage and plastics as one continent, it would be the size of a new continent. But we do have also, as you mentioned very aptly, plastics starting to have more and more negative influence on a lot of marine ecosystems as well, right? We hear stories about fish or dolphins or whales which are either injured or killed because they get too much plastics catching them up or in their throats or whatever.
And I guess like you just asked just before about the government. I guess like it's more like education. We need also to educate people to like you need to recycle your garbage, because if you're not starting to recycle, it's just gonna go in like a rotting space, and it's just going like to.
And we see this also, for example, in countries like Germany, where and Nordic countries, where recycling is much more just an acquired part of the culture, right? Speaking of which, it made me think about this idea that was being proposed that we have sort of smart garbage cans, so you can actually measure how much garbage and waste people produce on a household basis to have a sort of numbered way of presenting it to people. But I think there's a lot of opposition to it because it feels kind of like, the state getting too much information on you, how much garbage you produce or not. So there are ideas that are floating out there which have the potential to make a difference, but again, it's a complex situation.
The difference has to be at the government stage, because, for example, I go to organic stores and everything, but there's still as much plastic, or there's still a lot of it. So,
if I can be allowed to say so, I think it's a very French way of looking at things, that wanting the state to fix the problem for almost anything. And it's true because they do have a lot of power by enacting laws in one way or another. At the same time, I think it has to come from every side, right? It has to come from the individual, from the commercial side, the economic side, the political side of things. Maybe a final question or two, and then we can stop because we've already gone quite over time. Have you guys found any research about maybe new kinds of plastic which don't have the negative side effects and have the positive ones? Did you come across anything?
I heard about a new plastic, but it's like a new plastic. You got the wrapping plastic in your like kitchen.
Yeah.
And we're like searching about a new one that could be like, when you're using it, it has exactly the same properties that we have now about the wrapping plastic, but it could be like thrown out and it's just gonna disintegrate.
Sort of, okay, I see what you mean. Yeah. So it's more naturally degradable kind of plastic, but I suppose the payoff there would be the fact that it's probably less stable or less solid or something like that. Luca, are any final questions?
I think I asked all the interesting questions that I wanted to ask.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of going over most of the topics here. Thank you to you guys, Raphael, Colombe, and Sebastian. Thank you, Luca, as my co-host this time. Maybe one final question. What was most striking in your own research? What did you find? What was the most surprising thing that you learned while you were doing the research for this topic? Or how did it affect you? Are you going to change your behavior maybe having read this, or was it mostly stuff that you already knew?
So when I've done my research, so e-waste is important. Okay, it's one of the biggest part of waste, but
the biggest growing ones, right?
And I'm gonna go over there. So, and there's not a lot about it because before we don't have a lot of computers. It's just new. It's like about like 40 years, something like that. And today, people are more consuming a lot of technological new devices. So we have new phones every year, every month, new computers, new component. So it's gonna grow really, really quick. It's gonna be, I think, one of the biggest issues because it's gonna use a lot of elements.
And I think what we have to think about is most of the electronic waste doesn't come from individual electronics, but every data center contains thousands, maybe tens of thousands of computers which are renewed all the time. Most of our cars contain electronics in them, all of them actually. So most buildings are going to start containing that. So it's not just your phone and your PC and your laptop, but it's actually like our society is infused with electronics. That's a great point to keep in mind. Colombe, Sebastian, what was the most striking thing you found, or have you decided you're going to change something in your behavior with this, or?
For me, one thing that struck me when I was doing my research was about recycling plastic, because I always was told that plastic was very hard to recycle or almost impossible. But when I found this number of 75%, I first tried to confirm it because I was shocked. But I come to the conclusion that it's true. And the reason, because when I found the reason also because why we don't recycle, I just found it that it was dumb, because we just have to wash the
just
plastic.
Separate stuff, clean it up, and
Yes,
then
yeah. Because it has also
That's a really good point. That's a really good point, Sebastian. Bruno?
For example, I thought that cardboard was really the best alternative, but it is maybe for the moment, but we can find something better.
It's a temporary stopgap measure, but it can't be our final solution for this. Very interesting. Thank you guys very much for this. It was very, very interesting, and I think if we retain one thing is the importance of recycling and its indirect impact on emissions, especially when it comes to waste and plastics. So everybody go home, wash your plastics, put them in the right bin, and sleep a little bit easier. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice.